We all grew up with fairy tales, but did anyone tell you that they started off straight up as horror stories? Hello everyone, this is Cloris. How are you doing? The Brothers Grimm, two German scholars, collected folktales in the 1800s. In the original versions, they didn't care about happy endings. Indeed, they were full of blood, death, curses, and human stew. I'll tell you 5 creepiest Grimm fairy tales, and then I'll tell you why they are so dark and bloody. Let's dive in. The first one is Hansel and Gretel, aka the candy house of death. You probably remember the gingerbread house, the lost kids, and the wicked witch. But here's the full horror. Hansel and Gretel get abandoned in the wood by their stepmother because their parents didn't have enough food to feed them. They stumble on a house made of candy, which sounds amazing, until they realize it's a trap. Inside lives a witch who locks Hansel in a cage and starts fattening him up like a turkey. Gretel, she's forced to work and clean, while her brother waits to be roasted. But in a savage twist, Gretel tricks the witch, shoves her into her own oven and burns her alive. No prince, just fire and survival. It's filled with dark and disturbing elements, abandonment by parents, cannibalism, imprisonment and fattening, as well as violent revenge. The second one is Little Red Riding Hood, Rotkäppchen. You know the one cute girl in Red Hood goes to visit her grandma. She shows up at grandma's house, but something's off. The wolf got there first and he's already eaten grandma. Now the wolf is wearing her clothes, lying in her bed, and pretending to be the grandma. When Red finally realized that this is not her granny, boom, he eats her too. That's it. No rescue, no hunter, just 2 meals and happy wolf. In earlier versions, it's just a warning, don't talk to strangers. And the third one is Briar Rose, aka Sleeping Beauty. In German, Dornröschen. Sleeping Beauty's real name is Briar Rose, and her story is way darker than the Disney version. She pricks her finger on a spindle and falls into a 100-year coma, but it's not just her. Everyone in the castle, the king, the queen, the servants, even the cook, all drop where they stand and freeze in time. As years go by, the castle gets swallowed by giant thorn bushes, and every prince who tries to reach her gets stabbed, tangled, or bleeds to death in the thorns. It's a full-on death trap. However, one guy eventually makes it, not because he's brave, but because the curse just happens to end that day, and everyone wakes up like nothing happened. So yeah, not so much true love saves the day, but more like dumb luck and good timing. Number 4, Cinderella, Aschenputtel. In the Grimm version, there's no mice sewing dresses. Her magic comes from a tree growing on her mother's grave. And when she wants a dress, she prays and some birds just drop it from the branches. When the prince goes looking for her, he brings the glass slipper, and here's where things get brutal. The first sister tries it on, but her foot is too big, so her mother hands her a knife and says, "Cut off your toe. When you're a queen, you don't need to walk." So she does it, and blood everywhere. But on the way out, some birds sing. The shoe is full of blood. The bride is not true. Therefore, the stupid prince turns around, catches the lie. The second stepsister cut off her heel. Same deal, more blood and more bird snitching. Finally, Cinderella tries the shoe and perfect fit. And at her wedding, those birds fly down and peck out her stepsister's eyes. Number 5, Snow White, Schneewittchen. It's about poisoned organs and red-hot shoes. The evil queen wasn't just jealous of Snow White. She orders a huntsman to murder the girl and bring back her lungs and liver. She tries 3 times to kill her, once with a corset that strangles her, once with a poisoned comb, and finally with that famous poisoned apple. Snow White chokes, dies, and she's put into a glass coffin. But then, plot twist, the prince doesn't magically revive her. Instead, when he's transporting that coffin, the apple chunk accidentally got out from her throat. She wakes up like, what just happened? And the queen? She gets invited to the wedding, but when she shows up, she is forced to dance in red-hot iron shoes until she drops dead. No mercy, just molten justice. So yeah, the Grimm brothers didn't write bedtime stories. They were writing warnings wrapped by folklore. Disobey, betray, and be cruel, you'll get burned, blinded, or eaten alive. But why these stories are so dark and bloody? There are 5 main reasons. First of all, these are the warnings, not entertainment. Before they became bedtime stories, they were more like warnings. They were moral survival guides. These tales were told in small villages, passed down orally to warn people, especially children, about firstly, strangers like the wolf in the Little Red Riding Hood, and second, wandering into the woods like Hansel and Gretel, and third, greed, pride, and vanity, just like the queen in Snow White and the stepsisters in Cinderella. And lastly, disobedience and laziness. They were not trying to comfort kids, but to scare them into behaving and staying safe. The second reason is that life back then was brutal. The Grimm brothers collected these tales in the early 1800s, a time when children often die young. Also, violence, disease, and superstitions were part of daily life. Therefore, it's no surprise that the stories reflected that. These dark, bloody plots shockingly relatable to people living hard lives. By the way, back in the 19th century, Germany wasn't a single country, it was a bunch of small states. Around that time, Napoleon was taking over parts of Europe, and people were scared of losing their culture. That's why the Brothers Grimm decided to step in. Inspired by the Romantic movement, they believed that collecting old folk tales could help protect German identity. But the original stories were messy and dark, so they rewrote them, making them more moral, more Christian, and easier for families to read. They also used High German, which helped shape German language. So really, their fairy tales were more than just stories, they were about saving a culture. Reason number 3. These tales were based on even older, harsher folklore. The Grimms didn't invent these stories. They collected and rewrote those older oral tales. Many of them had been around for centuries, usually even darker than the versions they printed. In fact, the Grimms even toned down some elements over time, especially something too sexually explicit, once they realized that kids were reading them. But they still left some violence in, because that was seen as a more acceptable way to teach morality. Number 4. Violence was just a form of justice. Do you notice that in Grimm tales, the villains don't just lose, but also suffer from violent, gruesome punishment? These scenes are to show that the evil people got what they deserve, often in a twisted, poetic justice way. This is also a form of moral closure. The last reason, number 5, is that fear sticks better than sugar. Stories that scare you tend to stick in your mind. That's why these old tales are full of blood, death, brutal punishment, and curses. They arise fear to make the lessons more unforgettable. In old times, parents would tell the children, don't go into the woods alone because in the woods there's a witch who eats your brother. Or they would tell children that if you disobey your parents or betray your sister or get greedy, you will get punishment. For example, you're getting eaten or blinded or barbecued in iron shoes. These are not exactly the fairy tales Disney told us. Which one gave you goosebumps? These stories are full of gothic and dark elements. Maybe these are not suitable for children in modern time anymore, but is there other ways to teach children to avoid dangers or protect themselves instead of telling them these horror stories? If you like this episode, please give it a thumbs up and see you soon. Bye!